Here we are in episode 5 of Dan in his van. Just a little safety announcement. These are the keys, so I can't go anywhere and do this at the same time, which would be dangerous and illegal. So, today it's about music notation and the whole reading music. Do I read music? Do I have to do it? Why must I do it? Or if you do read music, does it give you any disadvantage with things like improvising or mixing or whatever it is you're going to be doing? Now, the earliest recorded music manuscripts come from Babylonia, from about 1400 BC. So what's that, 3,000 something years? That's quite a long time ago, but it's a tiny fraction of the length of time that we've been making music for. You know, drums and musical instruments have been discovered that are far, far older than that. And a lot of the time it was about handing tunes down to the next generation. You know, you play a tune or sing a tune and somebody says, "Oh yeah, great," and they sing it to their children, all that. Now, there are advantages to doing that, using your ears, using your powers of human emotion to convey a piece of music. And you can't really notate that. You can't say, "Oh, it needs to be." You need to feel like it's a winter's day and it's raining and your cat's just died. You can't write that on a piece of manuscript paper, but you can play music with those thoughts in mind. So it's not just about the notes and the rhythms. You do get dynamic markings on music as well, but it's mostly about the notes and the rhythms. And they are just two things in a whole sea of things that you need to think about when you're a musician. Now, I don't remember not reading music. I started violin when I was about 6. And actually those open strings on the violin, the G, D and A and E, every time I see those on a manuscript, piece of manuscript paper, I can still see the front room that I learnt those notes in. They just bring back all sorts of memories of learning music, and sharps and flats and different notes mean different colours, and there's all this sort of, so it's been intertwined into my very existence. Now, there are lots of people who read, who wish, for example, they say, "Oh, I wish I could improvise." But they've been brought up with music reading, so they read orchestral parts, or whether they're doing music exams, that sort of thing. So lots of scales and pieces and a bit of sight reading. But then you say, "Oh, I'll improvise on G major," and they go, "Oh, where's the music?" And then on the other side of the coin, you have somebody who has been playing for their entire life and doesn't read a note of music. Now, my hero, my guitar hero, is Django Reinhardt. Now, he couldn't even read or write his own language, let alone read or write any music. But I've heard there's a couple of interviews of him talking, and of course his playing. But you realise that he's completely articulate and completely capable of all sorts of things. But the fact that he didn't read music or didn't know the music theory was fine. There was no problem with that at all. Now, of course, cases like Django Reinhardt, they are fairly thin on the ground. But you will find other people who are amazing musicians who know their theory, or they know what to do over a chord sequence, for example. But if you put a piece of treble clef in front of them and go, "Oh no, I can't do that." And you do find those sort of people who suddenly develop a sort of an insecurity when you put a piece of music in front of them. And while I understand and respect people for being a musician without reading, it's a shame because actually the reading of the music isn't overly tricky. And I'll give you an example of this. And this is a bit of a weird, convoluted example, but I had a piano pupil, and first lesson, just beforehand, I had a briefing from the teacher saying, "Look, he's got full-on dyslexia, and he's been tested for this, and this." Completely articulate, intelligent chap, this guy. But alphabet from A to G, that was tricky for him to get all the letters in order. So I thought, oh, well, if he knew the alphabet A, B, C, D, E, F, G, it might be tricky to say what's 3 letters above A. Abstract concepts like that, you just think, and he sort of flew into a little bit of a panic. But then I showed him how to read music, and I just equated the notes on the stave to the notes on the piano with no letters at all. No letters at all, nothing printed, just the notes, and saying, right, this is this note on this key. So I made a little piece of paper that goes behind the piano keys where you can just see the notation. And he went, oh yeah, that's fine, I can do that. And what actually happened over the course of the year, we were just doing this, and I was writing out tunes that he was familiar with as well, which is another way of helping you to learn to read music, is to read stuff that where the tune is familiar. At the end of the year, he could recite his alphabet, and I just thought, whoa, I mean, that was completely unforeseen. But he just got on so well with the notation side of things that he could go A, B, C, D, E, F, G. He could do that. I mean, the rest of the alphabet was still a little bit patchy, but he'd learnt the first bit absolutely fine. And he ended up being quite a good player, actually. Showed him chords, and then I started to sort of work in the letters, work in the theory, and there were difficulties, but notation certainly helped because it's pictorial, and lots of people prefer to learn stuff in a pictorial way rather than a theoretical way. So in a way, music reading does allow you more music theory knowledge, even if you don't really know that it's going in, that you're learning it. So from a theory standpoint, learning to read music does help you in that, with the theory. Now, people who, as I said, people who read music are sometimes sort of slightly dismayed when they hear somebody improvising and think, well, that's amazing, but where do they learn that? Or where's the music? And they say, well, there isn't any. Now, that's not being totally fair on those who read music, because usually you have, orchestral players or church organists, pianists, that sort of thing, who can read fluently. It's just the name of it's really the sort of nature of the industry that says that they don't improvise. So they're an orchestral player, or they're, recording the complete works of, the complete keyboard works of Beethoven or something. All the music will be there, but you do see concert pianists who will play from memory. One of the reasons why they do that is, obviously, it looks great. They just sat down at a piano and can literally recite the entire work. But when you take your eyes away from the music, it means that your ears start to really fine tune. And you are listening then to really in-depth things, the phrasing, the emotion of how you would play a piece. Are you playing a piece because it's a grey Saturday and, your cat's just died? Or are you playing it because it's, there's a W in the day? Or whatever you happen to be feeling emotionally comes out in your performances. Nobody ever performs the same thing twice, even if they think they do. There's always emotions, there's always influences there. So when you are reading music, because the whole thing about this episode 5 of Dan in his Van is about music notation, the easiest thing to get started with is just to worry about treble clef. Don't worry about bass clef. Although if you are a bass player exclusively, then perhaps yes, bass clef, but don't worry about treble clef. Now, in treble clef, you have, well, on any clef, you have 5 lines. Why is it 5? Well, it's easy to see at a glance. If it was 7 lines, it would be trickier to see if a note is in the middle or just above, especially at a glance. I write brass parts out for people sometimes, and it's, in dimly lit stages, so you have to make sure that your manuscript is as good as it can possibly be. But so you've got your 5 lines, which means 4 spaces internally on your treble clef. And those 4 spaces, looking from the bottom space, is F, A, C, E. So you've got your bottom space is F, then you've got an A, then a C, and then an E. Now, some people like to learn, especially if it's piano, will want to learn where middle C is, because it's in the middle of the piano. And that's quite convenient if you're learning bass and treble clef at the same time, because middle C is, I just say to kids, it looks like Saturn. So it's a planet underneath the 5 lines with a single line going through it to represent the rings of Saturn. And then the bass clef, middle C, is exactly the same idea, but it sits above that stave. So you could work from a few different angles here. The best thing to do is to try and just do simple tunes first that appear within the stave itself, and then just to start to work outwards to see what's on the ledger lines, which are those extra lines above the page. And after a while, guitarists, actually, you could do this by looking at violin studies. Lots of electric guitarists who are kind of more into the sort of technical side, things, metal and sort of fast, sort of jazzier stuff, do tend to do that. They'll take a book of violin studies in order to read treble clef, because actually the range of notes that you see on the page, although it's an octave down on the guitar from printed, it's actually quite a nice area of the guitar to play in. So, for example, the E string on the guitar, the high E string, or the thinnest string, is actually the E at the top of your stave, in the top space. That E represents the first string of a guitar. So the second fret on the D string, for example, is the E that is an octave below that, which is a spot on the bottom line that crosses the bottom, where the bottom line crosses the note rather than the note being in the space. But every single time you go from a space to a line to a space to a line, it's basically a step on the piano. It's a little bit trickier for guitar. It's a little bit, there are more pitfalls, more traps to fall into, which is perhaps one reason why guitarists don't tend to learn from notation. It's also pattern based. So there are reasons why people don't learn music. Now, I had to have this out with a fellow music teacher once, who said that you weren't a good musician if you didn't read. You have to read. You don't, you just have to do it. And I said, well, do you have to do it? I've got a friend who plays tenor saxophone who can read a bit, but it's not something he does. But he's the best sax player I've ever heard. You don't need to do it in order to be a good musician, but it does help with things like theoretical knowledge and also musical jobs, things like going and playing in a pit band for a production or a play, or just depping with somebody, especially if you're a horn player. Now, of course, people might say, well, I don't want to do dep playing, and well, yeah, that's fine. I do 10 or 12 different things. And I find that it's a very good and stable way to make a bit of money is to have this music notation in my head. And actually, you do get more jobs if you can read, because you never know when you're going to need it.